We need to talk about what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we have
first,
no idea
maybe.
what we're going to talk about. What are we going to talk about?
Because I was talking to my brother the other day. He's a Christian scientist, a very devout Christian scientist, and he's not as articulate as you are at sort of defining why he thinks what he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a conversation, and it was good. But he kind of got hung up on the idea of, I was talking about the idea of the tree, the apple tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why would God tempt you? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
why do that? And and he sent me this quote from from the scriptures. I think the Keys to the Scriptures, the Mary Baker Eddy book, that said something about God would not allow man to make a decision and then punish him for making that decision, that God is beyond that, and God is love, and God wouldn't, that's not something. But then it doesn't go on to explain why it's there. So I thought maybe we would talk about the apple tree.
Yeah, that's great.
Is that cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
So welcome back after
A long
so
hiatus.
long. It was terrible.
We can be in the same room again.
But we're back, yes. So
And we're
welcome.
vaccinated, so we can hug
Yeah,
each other.
We're all set. We got it. We got it all. So welcome back to Talking in the Chasm.
Season 2, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Compassionate, controversial conversation between best friends, holy man.
And an atheist.
I'm Felix.
And I'm Matthew.
All right,
So we want to talk about, it's not actually an apple tree. About
Right.
the tree.
So we start off, I'm wrong. Just straight up.
Yeah,
I said let's talk about the apple tree in Eden, not an apple tree.
it's the tree of the knowledge, of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Which is a complicated
Yeah.
title.
Do they sell that in the grocery store?
No, I don't. I've never
The
seen
fruit
one.
of
Knowledge of good and evil.
Knowledge of good and evil.
So, within Christian thought, there's a few different ways of approaching this story. The most liberal kind of modernist versions of Christian thought that are talking about this story, because it's where the Bible begins, talk about it in terms of like a mythology, like it's a moral
The
story,
right? Yeah.
more than an actual event. I'm more of a literalist, so I think there was an actual garden, an actual creation, an actual Adam and Eve, and an actual tree with fruit that produced knowledge of good and evil. But in either case, the interesting thing about that is not just that it's fruit, but what the fruit is, that it's the knowledge of good and evil. So the presumption is that before this event, Adam and Eve don't have a category for right and wrong. They're not morally aware, like an animal. Like,
Right.
When the lion eats a gazelle, it's not an evil action, it's just a lion being a lion. And in that sense, man was in a more animalistic state without a moral conscience. And that may be the answer to the question of why the tree is there and the rule is there, is that what's happening through the fall is the progression of man from a non-moral entity to a moral entity, the choice to enter into the place where he knows right and wrong. God's interest in the story is that they stay in this naive, innocent capacity. And for good reason. Like, presumably they're not going to have wars, they're not going to have all kinds of problems that we have in a post-fallen world. But so God's preference is for his creation to stay in that innocent, light phase, but they choose to do wrong. It's interesting to, like, the other details of the story, and I don't know if you've read it, it's in Genesis, I think, 3. The other details of the story is that they're tempted. They don't just happen across it on their own. That the serpent
Right.
tricks Eve the way that he tricks her is by promising her something that's unattainable. He promises her that he says that God did he really say that? Is his first question. Did he really say you're not supposed to eat of it? There's a lot of really interesting lessons from this whole mythology, whether it's actual or not. It's a mythology nonetheless. And what he promises her is that this enlightenment, this knowledge of good and evil, will actually make her like God. And it seems that his appeal is that the difference between man and God is this knowledge of good and evil. Like, he has a moral calculus that we don't understand. And if you eat this fruit, then you'll be like him. It doesn't turn out that way. But the interesting thing, what I think is an even better question than why does God put the tree there, which is something worth talking about. But the more interesting question to me is, why does God let it happen? Because the way I've articulated this question is, when Eve eats the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, within that moment, from God's perspective, is like all of the horror that's ever going to happen on earth. Like, if that's the threshold that we cross into a moral world where people choose evil or good, then all of the evil that happens essentially, it's the precipitating moment. It's the initial cause for all the evil that's going to happen. So all the war, all the bloodshed, all the rape, all the incest, all the murder, all the violence, all of the treachery, betrayal, hatred, greed, all of that is contained, it's distilled into this one moment. And the question I've always asked since I was a little Sunday school boy, was, why doesn't God tell her not to do it? Why doesn't God slap it out of her hand? Why doesn't God, a million things.
Right.
What I always heard in church growing up was that the reason he doesn't is because he wants us to have free will. He wants us to choose. But we don't think that her free will is abrogated by the devil tempting her. So why do we think that her free will would be abrogated by God saying, hey, stop, don't do that. Let me tell you what's going to happen, or let me show you, or there's a million things he could have done that would have preserved her free will, just like the serpent's temptation. Now, I think there's some ways to approach and answer at that, but they assume certain things. I have prejudices that cause me to think that those things are rational. Like God is good, like the creation was intended to be without death, like a bunch of things that are a priorities for my assumptions. But what it all distills down to is that there's a passage much, much later in the Bible where Paul says, for I contend that the sufferings of this life are not to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in the sons of God. And what he means by that is that the good that comes out of our capacity to be moral agents is better than the bad that comes from our capacity to be free moral agents. And so if it's true that every murder and rape and horrible thing that's possible is distilled into that moment, it's probably also the case that every good thing is distilled into that moment. Every love, every kindness, every healing, every act of mercy is also distilled in that moment. Because it's good and evil that are traced to that. And so those are all the consequential things that come after that. But why the initial condition of the tree in the garden is the question we started with. And I think it is rooted in free will. It is rooted in God wanting us to choose. And I do it with my children all the time. I put choices in front of them in order to shepherd them into learning how to make good choices. And if you're going to make good choices, you have to have the capacity to make bad choices. And that's ultimately why I think the tree's in the garden in the first place.
All right. I have a lot of problems with that. We'll start from what you just said and go backwards, I guess. Yeah, you put choices in front of your children. When they choose the bad one, do you smack them and evict them from the house and tell them they can never come home again?
No.
Okay, that's one. Okay, the other one is.
Well, let's work through them one at a time.
Sure.
But that's not what we're talking about, because your children do get to a point where they're old enough where if they step into the road and they haven't learned to make choices, that they get hit by a bus, or they burn their hand, or they hurt somebody, or they make horrible decisions, or they do terrible things. And so the consequences do scale up to adults, where we use juvenile choice, like these little consequences and little actions, to teach them to make big actions. But those big actions do come. And by the time our children are grown, they're deciding whether they want to be horrible people or good people, whether they want to be kind or unkind, evil or righteous. All of those are implicit in the process of making decisions.
Right. God makes a paradise.
Right.
He puts a tree and says, do not eat this fruit from this tree.
Right.
That's cruel. Or just straight up, right then and there, why would you do that? Okay? So he says, okay, don't eat the tree. They do eat the tree, and he says, I told you not to eat the tree, you're gone. And women will suffer childbirth, and there will be, all horrible, whatever. That seems cruel. That seems awful and terrible, and I can't imagine worshiping a creature that could do that. A being that would allow that to happen, that would do that. Somebody created the snake, right? If God is all omniscient, omnipresent, he makes the snake. So, you said, well, what's the difference between that or God saying, hey, no, don't eat it? Well, it's the same thing. God made the snake, so it doesn't matter from what angle you come from, right? So I feel immediately that's just an awful thing, because that is temptation,
yeah.
and to what you say about all the evil comes from the fruit, but then so does all the good. In my opinion, right? I mean, this is sort of more philosophy, but it's like, how can you have good without having evil? You have nothing to compare it to, right?
That's
you can't
the point.
like just be right, but so there's this book by Kurt Vonnegut, and I can't remember the name, but it's told like millions of years in the future by a ghost talking about the present, and basically man has evolved back into the ocean, and we're just like dolphins, and we're just play and we chatter, and and I'm like, that's preferable. I would rather honestly not have the knowledge. I'm happy. Why can't we just be animals that do what we do because that's what we are?
I wouldn't be. I'm not happy.
Totally
I wouldn't be happy in an animalistic naivete, ignorance. I think that moral calculations are why life is worth living. I think the capacity to choose, and this is why I don't agree with your analysis of the tree being there in the first place, is that I think that the capacity to choose is why life is meaningful. A dolphin doesn't have meaning. A dolphin just has either good or bad. A dolphin is subject to its environment. Well, I mean, when you look at the life of an animal, I mean, it's subject to its environment. I don't know what its emotional state is, right. But it's not creating cities. It's not
right.
deciding whether or not.
It's about survival, right?
Right.
And progeny, and making sure your species carries on. But honestly, that's the end goal of man. I mean, yeah, we have buildings and stuff, but when you pull it out and pull away, we're just trying to get by. We're trying to survive, and we're trying to make sure that we continue.
So I think this is why the Christian story includes these things, is that a worldview with meaning, like a worldview with a creator, with a purpose, with design, is an entirely different worldview than an accidental existence. And if I begin my worldview by the assumption that the world is an accident, that it's just a matter of environment, that it's just a condition, it just exists, and it is, and there isn't a sense of meaning, and there isn't a sense of purpose, then I might prefer to be a gorilla or a rat or a whatever, just eking out its existence. And it would be really good to be a happy rat with a lot of cheese instead of a starving rat on a ship or in a desert. But the only value would be whether or not you have food and can breed. I'm not content with that because
you've eaten from the fruit.
I've eaten from the fruit of the tree.
So you're not content. The Garden of Eden was full of creatures that were content,
right,
until that happened,
right,
and now you struggle to be content.
Right.
We all do, And I mean, I'm a now with medication and therapy, I'm a happy person, and I love life and art and beauty, and I see it every day, and it fills me with joy and wonder, and I love learning, and I love figuring out how stuff works.
But isn't the struggle worth that beauty?
So I think so now. There was a time when I certainly didn't. It just felt like violence all the time.
Right.
But anyway, so my brother sent me this thing from the Mary Baker Eddy, the Keys to the Scripture, and it says something about God would not punish man for making a choice that God gave him to make. Uh-huh. Right? I mean, God said, here, you choose, and then you choose something, and then God's going to punish you. That seems arbitrary, and God wouldn't do that. He's a good guy, right? I'm like, so then why was there a flood?
Well, I don't know about that premise. So what I would say is I would reshape that statement. And there's a famous kind of like theological dispute in the Christian church. It's often known as Pelagianism. Pelagius was a man who said something like, we don't know what he actually said because they burned all his writings, but what he said, but what we can basically reconstruct is that if God said to do X, then it must be possible for man to do X, that he's not going to ask us to do something that we cannot do. And so if he has a series of requirements, I want you to do this and this and that, then it must lie within the capacity of man to do those things, or the implication is that God is immoral for asking, like, I don't ask a baby to do calculus. Like, that would be wrong of me to hold a baby to the standards of doing calculus. And so that's the Pelagian argument, which is different than saying God wouldn't allow consequences and outcomes that were negative, because that's a different thing.
But don't you see there's a baby in a room with toys all around, and then there's a plate in the middle with a cookie, and you tell the baby, do not eat that cookie. And you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then pretty soon the baby eats the cookie, right? I mean, what is the point? I just feel like God is just delighting in us, fumbling and watching us bumble around.
That view is because of your prejudices. Because I teach my dog not to eat things in the living room all the time. And it's for the good of the dog, and it's for the good of the household.
Right, but
and
you know what I do
is
I don't put chocolate on the floor in the living room because it will kill him.
Okay, but
so I don't do it.
But here's the thing. Here's a better way, I think, is teach the dog not to eat things that are on the floor. Because you aren't always going to be there to make sure that there's no chocolate or there's no whatever you don't want chewed up. And so I don't mean to equate dogs and babies all in the same category, but the fact that if we talk about the naive innocence, a dog is reasonable facsimile, and to teach, so you can either do two things with a baby or a dog. You can say, I'm going to create an environment where it can't get hurt, or I'm going to teach it how to navigate a complex environment where if there's something that would hurt it, it won't get hurt because it's been trained not to hurt itself.
You may be able to train a dog not to eat chocolate. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, for sure,
you probably can. Yeah. I'm not sure you can train a dog not to eat anything that's dangerous for it because it doesn't know what's dangerous until it eats it. But what you can do is you, with your superior intellect, can be responsible for that creature.
Right.
And try to have that creature live and be happy. And in order to do that, you take away from it the things that would kill it, right? You're the one that has to make sure the dog doesn't go into the street. You're the one that makes sure that chocolate's not on the floor. Unless you want to take the time to train him not to eat chocolate, but then there's going to be a grape one day. You know what I mean? It's like, he's going to find a grape in the wild. And you're like, what's this? This is perfectly, he's going to die. So my job as a dog owner is to make sure that the floor is free of chocolate. I don't understand how, why does it seem crazy to think of God taking the piece of chocolate and putting it on the floor and just sitting back and watching?
Well, maybe he didn't want us to stay like dogs. But also...
Maybe he didn't want to what?
Maybe he didn't want us to stay like dogs. Maybe the capacity to walk
Right.
into that environment...
Because he's bored and he wants to see conflict. I mean, he wants wars. It's not interesting, right? It was boring in the Garden of Eden. So,
He's not bored.
does he enjoy the struggle of watching us decide of he introduces temptation. That's a struggle. That's all it is. It's conflict. It's me going, I want this, but I shouldn't take it. I want it, but I shouldn't. Why is it there?
I think that it's there to produce a different outcome. So I don't think that he designed the temptation. I think the temptation comes from the serpent, who is also a free moral agent.
Okay, so let's stop right there. He did not design the serpent. He did not design the temptation.
He designed a good creation. So this is the premise of the creation. That the creation as God makes it is good. There's no death.
Right.
There's no violence. Even the animals are passive. Everything's good. It's utopian. It's paradise.
Mm-hmm.
So the serpent in that under that model is a fine creature. He's my buddy. Hey, serpent, let's chill. And he's fine. Lucifer, who is also a created being as an angel, falls into the same kind of dispute with God. He says, I can be like the Most High. I'm going to be God.
God made an angel.
He made a bunch of angels, but yeah.
And then this angel
rebels against him.
out of nowhere. I mean, where did the idea of rebellion come from?
It comes from him.
God is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent.
Mm-hmm.
He creates it.
Right.
The hand of God is in everything. So the hand of God is in the heart of Lucifer.
Right.
And he allowed Lucifer to rebel. Because... Why?
Because he
it's more
believes in
interesting.
free will. Giving someone free will is just sitting back and delighting in watching the struggle. I don't agree. Free will is because the alternative without free will, like if you create a world and an environment where there is no choice, like do you remember Clockwork Orange? Did you ever read Clockwork Orange?
Yeah.
Like, so you remember the whole storyline that was big to us when we were skinheads. It was a big cult classic for our people.
Yeah, I read the book recently, actually.
And his point is what? His point is that if you don't have a choice, you're not really a moral creature. Like the main character does not become good because he cannot commit violence. He just becomes controlled.
Well, to me, the main point of that part of the book was that barbarism won't solve anything. I mean, you cannot create a good being through torture. And in fact, the whole point of the book was that they didn't create a moral being,
But the attempt was to create morality through external control. It's like an abuse for an alcoholic. Like if every time you drink, you become violently ill, you haven't learned not to drink. You've just learned not to be violently ill.
Right.
And the same is true in Clockwork Orange with the violence, is that if every time you have a violent thought you become violently sick, then you have not ceased to be violent. You've just ceased to be capable of the violence that you would like. Right.
But
and that capacity to either be good or evil is from free will. And so here's the premise where I think we disagree. I think a world where people can choose to be good or evil is better than a world where people cannot choose to be good or evil.
That may be. My point is, why would God give people that choice and then punish them for choosing one or the other?
Because to have a choice is to imply consequence.
But to have a choice means that you are free from an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent being. Because, I mean, you think God doesn't know what I'm going to choose? You think God doesn't know both of the outcomes? I mean, maybe I'm not understanding omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, but to me, that is all-powerful, all everywhere, all-knowing. All-knowing. It's not like God doesn't know what you're going to pick. It's not like God doesn't understand the consequences or what you're going through. What is the point of it? Is why the war? Why not just a Garden of Eden with butterflies and laughing dolphins? I mean, what you really think that you prefer having choices?
I do. I think I prefer being able to choose.
You'd rather have sexual ecstasy at the expense of there being rape and murder and torture. Do you know what I mean? It's like sexual ecstasy. It's amazing, right? It's worth living.
Right.
Rape is absolutely horrific. Would I trade one for the other? Probably. I probably would. I would sacrifice my sexual ecstasy to if I could ensure that there was no rape. And so in that regard, I don't understand. People, that's what they always say. It's like, oh, well, it's free will. There's no such thing. You cannot have a God that controls everything and allows you free will unless he's just having fun, just delighting in the struggle. He's watching you struggle.
So I don't think that God's attributes imply his cause for evil. In other words, to allow people to choose. So if I allow a choice, that does not make me responsible for the outcome of the choice. If I say, whatever, pick X or Y, and you pick Y, and Y is not good, that doesn't make me responsible for you choosing Y. The fact that you have a choice, even if it's given by me.
But you built Y. You know what I mean?
I could have built X or Y.
Let's say that there's a marble that's going to drop, and it's going to go left or right. Mm-hmm. This is random and not absolute choice, but we can imagine that the marble makes a choice. In this side, the marble falls into a box of other marbles. In this side, it hits a bomb and explodes a building.
Right.
We made a bomb that explodes a building over here. Regardless of what choice the marble ended up making, we made a bomb over here. Why did we do that?
I think it's what's a more appropriate analogy is that, like, the capacity to move, the capacity to have arms and muscles, is to imply that I could beat you with them. Like the fact that I'm a physical creature with physical capabilities. What does it mean to have that exist? If a bicep exists, if my finger bones and hands exist, then they can be a fist. And so either neuter that environment so it has no capacities, or the fact that those capacities exist means They can be followed out.
But the lion lying down with the lamb is ridiculous to me. Why does the lion have 3-inch pointy teeth and claws? I mean, what, is he not a lion anymore when he lies down with the lamb? I mean, what does that even mean? As you say, you're just taking away muscles. I mean, so in other words, for there to be no choice or for there to be no good and evil, there would be nothing.
Right.
Which is to me what death is, nothing. And maybe that's heaven, Who was it, David Byrne or something? Heaven is a place where nothing ever happens. Because for things to happen, there needs to be conflict, right? Name a good story where there isn't conflict, where something bad doesn't happen, where good doesn't overcome evil. If good doesn't overcome evil, then good was just always there and always will be, and nothing ever happened. Well, and that, to me, that's what being the dolphin is. I would prefer that to rape. I mean, maybe that's framing it negatively. Maybe they're saying, I prefer that to a Bernini sculpture. Well, yeah, I love Bernini. However, rape really makes me upset.
But yeah.
It's just this free will thing. Just like everything else, it just comes down to like semantics and to etymology, to words. Like, what does that really mean? But to me, free will means that the maker of the choice has absolutely no regard, consequence, ability to change, ability to move, ability to do anything, with that choice. If that were true, then there would be no point in prayer. There would be no point in any kind of back and forth with the creature that will absolutely not touch anything that he's done, because otherwise there wouldn't be free will. If he's like, I'm going to let this 4-year-old win the beauty pageant because I'm going to just let that happen. Well, then that's not really free. That's not.
So free has to be, from that construct, free has to be radically independent. Like it has to be like almost in a vacuum.
Well, free is independent.
Why isn't free
you have
capable?
freedom to make a choice. So I can make this choice or I can make that choice. What's cruel is to say, if you make this choice, I'm going to love you and you're going to get to stay home. If you make this choice, you're out. And women are going to suffer childbirth for the rest of eternity because of a choice you make. The whole thing is just insane to me when you think of it in that way, right? All evil came to this woman made a choice. Mm-hmm. Maybe she was even tricked into making a choice, but whatever. Especially if she was tricked, that's even worse. Mm-hmm. And God's like, I know you're a trick, but out. I can't wrap my head around it and not have God turn out to be a jerk. I want to, love, believe, feel like we are all, that it's not just a fairy tale. That people, that in order to believe, you have to just look at this and you can't look at that, because if you do look at that, there's no possible way to believe. I can't believe in a good Lord that has a pile of bad. He's, I can't.
What do you think of, there's, I don't know if they would be satisfying to you, but there is something about the post-fallen world. Like, for instance, there's a premise that there are certain things that God is that he can't be in, and certain things that we are that we can't be in that pre-fall environment. For instance, you can't be merciful before the fall. You can't really even be kind. You can't really love, because love implies the choice to not love.
Exactly. You can't have good without having evil, or else there is no good or evil.
Right.
Because you have to have something to compare it to.
So we agree with that premise.
Sure.
So then what the choice is, it's not just sexual ecstasy and rape. It really is all of the capacities to choose, including aesthetics, but also every other choice that we make. Or a real radical determinism, like in the alternative case, it seems like all of the living creatures just become fixtures, like a plant or like the cabinet, and it's hard for me to accept the premise that the more loving creator is the one that makes me like a piece of furniture, instead of one who can choose to love him back or hate him, who can choose to love his fellow creatures or hate them. But when you choose
to hate him, he punishes you.
Okay.
What's up with that?
Okay, but
he gave you a choice,
right?
And one of the things you choose, he'll punish you, and one of them he'll reward you.
But most of what constitutes that punishment, and like the whole future afterlife thing, is this. We can put that in a separate category for now. But most of what those consequences are, at least as far as we're concerned right here and right now, are consequential. Like, it's just like there being gravity. Like, it would be really nice to be able to float across the room. It would be really nice to be weightless. It would be really nice to do a lot of things. If you're going to have gravity, that means you're going to fall. If you have gravity that holds you to the earth and we're not all just spinning around the cosmos, then the capacity is there for me to break my tooth on the edge of the cabinet.
Yeah.
So the question is, it's like a moral version of the physical laws. Is it better to be a world, and from a non-caused worldview, like atheistic evolution, like it's immaterial. Like, you can't put a value on it. But from a created perspective, I think it makes sense that the risk of chipping your tooth on a dresser or on a stone is worth sticking to the ground. Like, that, the consequence of having gravity is worth the liability of being in a world with gravity. And morally, I think the same thing is true. The consequences that come from having choices are made bearable by the good choices that people make, or even the capacity to make choices.
So you choose to walk next to a cliff and you fall and you die.
Uh-huh.
And your survivors say, well, God gave him free will, and that was it. He chose. That's what he chose. Have you
Well,
ever
they certainly
said?
say when
Have you
they
ever
jump
said,
off of the cliff.
Have you ever said in your life, God has a plan?
I don't usually. I have a different framework. I don't usually talk that way.
Because that just infuriates me. It's like, God cannot have a plan and you have free
Right.
will. Those two things cannot coexist. Do you agree with that?
I do, and there's a resolution for it. This is a whole separate subject, but there's another idea that's become it's talked about a lot more recently, and it's an idea called open theism. Have I ever told you about this before?
I don't know.
So it really has it's a premise about reality and about time and chronology, and the premise of openness is that, kind of like string theory, that the future has infinite possibility, that every moment is made by the moment before, that basically that time is a real condition of reality. And there's a Christian version of open called theism, open theism, and what it claims is that when God creates the world, he kind of steps into time with his creation. Now, time began like all of reality, but he chooses to enter into it. And so an implication of this idea is that every moment is conditioned on the past. Right. And so so I can still, if the future's open, like here's a test case. Like, does God know what the stock market next week will be? Well, it's an interesting question. If the future is open, he may be very, very, very good at predicting it, because he can actually, like a supercomputer, he can hold all known data. Well, how much data is that? How much predictive value is to know all knowable things? It has to be enormous. Like if Google can tell I'm going to buy a computer next month because of how long my mouse hovers on an ad, then presumably God has a lot more predictive capacity.
Well, if he's omniscient, he knows everything.
Well, he knows all knowable things, right? Like, he can't know what is unknowable.
Okay.
So in this way, like, if the future's open, if tomorrow is predicated on today, and not just me today, but an almost infinite number of factors, what you do, what I do, like butterfly effect kind of stuff. If every moment is predicated on the free will actions of all free will characters, including God, then we're all conspiring together to make the next moments. And if this is the case, the reason it matters to me and the reason I examine it, it's also a very controversial idea. A lot of people don't like this idea. But the reason...
Because the idea there is that God is just one of the
participants of reality. Not observer, because I'm not an observer either.
Well, you are a participant, but for God to be a participant, right, that seems unfair.
To whom?
To all of us. If the omniscient, omnipotent, how does he participate?
Well, it participates. Well, you have to supply some ideas about who God is in order to answer that question. I presume that God is good and that he loves his creation and that he's operating to create the best good that's possible in the world. If that's true, then that's how he operates. If it's not true,
can
if
God
he's malevolent,
pluck cancer away? I mean, why would a 5-year-old die of brain cancer?
Well, he potentially could.
Why would somebody pray? I mean, why would somebody say, "Oh, please save my 5-year-old from brain cancer"? And then this person doesn't pray. Does God go, "Okay, you believe in me, you love me, you pray to me. I'm going to just pluck that cancer away. There you go. You're saved. Screw you."
Prayer is a really interesting component of all this. It factors in a lot to it, but
anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think that's worth pursuing. Why does God do some things and not others? If
that model is
the openness model,
the openness, which is pretty cool. I mean, to me, that's like getting into the realm where it seems like there's some sort of possibility. But again, I can't believe that a God would creates the universe and then that's sort of like the clockmaker. Right, He just sort of makes the clock and winds it up, and then just watches it go.
Yeah.
I mean, he can stop it, he can break a gear, he can do stuff,
right,
but I mean, he's not part of it.
Right.
Which makes prayer completely irrelevant, and whether or not you believe or not, completely irrelevant. And
well, I think if
worship, like why the demanding worship if it doesn't make any difference.
Worship is...
I know we're going everywhere.
Yeah, we are really broadening out. But they all tie back into this idea of who is God in reality. Like, how does it make sense that there could be a God involved in reality? And does
God extricate himself from the idea of free will? Does he allow free will to happen by completely hands-off, I'm going to let you...
That doesn't exist. I think that's a false idea, because free will doesn't mean that you're in a vacuum by yourself with no consequences. I mean,
well, I'm not saying
I have free will. I have free will. I mean, presumably, internally, from my perspective, I chose to put this shirt on and not the shirt next to it. Like, those are expressions of free will. When I do those things, like, it doesn't mean that I don't have to be free from any consequences. Like, I could have worn a shirt with profanity on it, and there would be implications from that. I could wear a shirt that was a woman's shirt. I could wear no shirt. There would be implications from all those actions. But the fact that there are implications from all those actions does not mean it was not a free will decision. So to be immune from any consequence is not a condition of free will. In fact, it's the opposite. It's, if there is free will, then there are consequences to actions.
Right. I mean, I'm not suggesting that there isn't a consequence. I mean, God can give you a choice and stand back and watch you make the choice. The consequences, it's sort of like the bomb in the marble. I mean, the consequence is built into the machine.
Right.
You know, God doesn't have to be part of that.
Right.
But then, if that is the case, then you're conceding that God is not omnipotent, and that prayer would be absolutely useless unless he lets some things go and interferes with others.
Well, I think he does let some things go
and interferes with others.
Yeah.
And why would he interfere with something, and why would he let something else go?
Well, I don't know all of those things. The other thing about this whole conversation from a Christian perspective is that a beginning premise is that I'm a very small piece in a very complex world, and that there are lots and lots of things I don't know. In fact, this is one of the great comforts of the Christian worldview, is that we all know that there are many, many things we don't know, and there's some kind of, in religious traditions, there's some kind of appeal to a crowdsourced information that's bigger than me, that allows me to find answers when I'm looking for what's bigger than myself. And so, that's a comfort, I think, whether it's true or false. The question of whether
Right, that's one of the reasons that I think religion exists, is for that comfort.
I
mean, science is exactly the same. Science is a crowdsourced search for meaning, for why things happen.
It may not be a crowdsourced sense for meaning, but for fact.
I mean, to me, it's almost like God kind of is in the gaps until science fills those gaps, right? What are the stars? Well, they're, God sprinkling dust or whatever it is, and then we realize, oh, okay, they're planets that are running around stars, so now we don't need God for that. And now God is, why does this happen? Well, because God did this, and then pretty soon we realize, oh, okay, here's why that happened, and then God is no longer in that gap. You know what I mean? It's almost as if God is what I need to get me through, so that the world is not random, so that nothing happens so that things happen in an orderly way that makes sense to me.
The problem with that is that there's always been atheists.
Right. There are people who look at the sky and say, I don't believe that's holes poked in a huge piece of construction paper. That can't be right. That makes no sense to me. Just like, having two of every single animal in the entire world on a boat makes no sense to me. Like, it's a ridiculous premise. It's absolutely ridiculous. So that makes, if it seems totally impossible. And, having a loving being create a garden and put a tree in it that says, if you eat the tree, you'll be cast away and you'll no longer be in my garden. I would prefer not to believe that, because it seems cruel and arbitrary. So, so that's why I'm an atheist, right? And a lot of people, many people, I don't know, maybe most people, need the story. They need to understand why it is that we suffer.
Right.
And maybe a way to feel like, okay, it's not just random. Babies don't just get cancer for no reason. There has to be a reason, and that is there's a being who has an idea that I don't understand. That's fine. I don't understand why babies get cancer. We don't understand the mind of God, so that's enough. It's like it's in God's hands. Somebody is protecting me.
I think those ideas, that's why I think these ideas about openness are important, is that I'm prone to that analysis in a deterministic world too. Like, if God is picking who gets cancer, then, or that cancer should exist, then yeah, I have that problem too. But if God is at work in the world, like I am, and if it bothers God that there's cancer, like it bothers me that there's cancer, if there actually is a contest between how do we create good instead of evil in the world, and I'm a participant in that, and you're a participant in that, and God's a participant in that, and everybody's participating in this, there's a conflict afoot. What's going to win, good or evil? And all of us play our part in that. That kind of world makes much more sense to me than God picked everybody that's going to get cancer, everybody that's going to live,
but
everybody
we don't want
die.
to vanquish evil. I mean, it sounds like you're just trying to get back to the garden, right? We're trying to get back to where we were all good, but you said that's not interesting.
But
you
see,
don't want to live that way.
But the end story is that you can remedy the blight. You can fix the cancer. You can cut it out, whether that's sin or physical cancer. That the future goal is that we get to the place where we know right from wrong, and we all choose right.
So there's no more rape.
Right.
And
because we
lions,
choose not to.
With their big teeth and their claws, no longer use them to get meat from the other creatures. I mean, that God makes a worm that goes through your eyeball and eats your brain. That's what it's for.
Right.
So we're
now
just got to
admit
that was not something that shouldn't have been designed it that way. I mean, I'm not.
No, but those were potentials, just like the potential for rape. But those were potentials, but the potential is rectified in that it's set right. That people don't choose rape. The capacity for rape is still there, but people don't choose it anymore. That's what the future goal is. That's the best of both worlds, right?
So what about mental illness, mental deficiencies, developmental disabilities? People that commit rape because they don't know anything. They're just an insane person.
That's just like cancer. Those are the same questions.
Right, but you can never get to a point where that developmentally disabled person chooses to not be developmentally disabled, or chooses not to do something that's insane, or not to hear a voice, or not to see a vision that's terrifying. You know what I mean?
You can't under current conditions. Like the lion is not going to lay down with the lamb. It's actually a wolf in the actual biblical account. It's a wolf with a lamb. But that's never going to happen in this physical world. There requires some divine intervention for a wolf to lie down with a lamb again, and that intervention in the biblical narrative is the resurrection.
So divine intervention meaning God has to do something, has to intervene in what he's already done.
Right.
He made the wolf have pointy teeth, and then needs to remedy that.
Well, he started the wolf to eat grass like an ox. That's the premise of the Garden of Eden.
And then Eve ate an apple, and wolves got pointy teeth.
Right. I mean, I don't know. But the whole world gets broken.
Right.
That before, in the biblical narrative, before the fall, there's not thorns on plants.
But I don't understand why you would not want to be a dolphin chippering away in the water, if that's where we're trying to get back to.
Well, because I don't want to be a dolphin chippering away in the water. I want to be able to have a world where there is choice and people choose right. But
if people never choose wrong, there is no choice.
No, you can still have the capacity to choose wrong.
You just never do.
Don't. Okay, so this is like actually a full wrap on the Christian theology, because that's exactly what Jesus was. Jesus was the one who had the choice to do any wrong that I do, but he never chose to do wrong. And this is the ideal man. This is the prototype. This is what all of us are pursuing. How do we be like Jesus? So if a guy could come here and live in this world, this broken world, and not create brokenness himself, that's the ideal human. That's the perfect man.
So Jesus never
sinned.
Never sinned. He was never a jerk to anybody ever in his life. Okay. Because I had heard that there was a version, I don't know, these stories where Jesus wasn't the all-loving pacifist.
That's never...
There's no passages that...
Not within the Christian tradition. In fact, what Jesus is, and I think we've talked about this before, but the Greek word that's used for him is logos, which is word, like a word, W-R-D, but it's also these conceptualizations. The way that the Christian tradition thinks of these things, like God has an idea of here's the world I want to create, and he speaks, and that which he speaks, that's Christ. That's the logos.
Right.
And that's actually the creative force that causes all these things to be. And he is the one who is incarnate and becomes Jesus on earth in Palestine in the year
Zero,
yeah.
Year one.
So when he comes, the same way that God had an idea about what reality should be, and he speaks that into existence through Christ, he had an idea about what should, could, and would man be in the ideal condition, and that was who Jesus was. So he's like that's what it means when we call him the Logos, is that he's the perfect conceptualization of what a man can be. He's the ideal.
So this is where, I'm a bad atheist, or at least this isn't my profession, because I can't quote from the Bible and come up with places where I thought that...
Have you read the Bible?
I have, when I was a kid, I did Sunday school and all that stuff, and I have a Bible since we started doing this, and, I have started it. I find it's difficult for me because I find it infuriating, it actually...
It doesn't bring
reinforces
peace.
Every thought that I have about God being unfair and cruel and awful, but I'm working on it. But if Jesus is the perfect human, and I'm not understanding why was he even made? Why aren't we all Jesus? Why don't we just all be perfect? Why the strife? Why the struggle? Huh?
Why aren't you?
Oh, I am. You didn't know that? I've never made a bad decision in my life.
That's right.
Yeah, right? Now you know. But, were he to make everyone Jesus, then there would be no struggle. And there would be nothing to go back to.
I think
the story would not be interesting. I feel like that's why there's the tree.
I think you're right that there would be no...
without
I think that you're right that there would be no struggle in the sense that nothing ventured, nothing gained. Like, in that sense, you're right. There would be no struggle. In that sense, you're right that conflict makes interest and meaning and value. But I don't think it's right that it's like a dog and pony show. I think that the fact that Jesus came here with no need to means that he's not just watching this, that he's involved in it, that he cares, that it's something that's deeply, profoundly meaningful to God, not just me, that he has an interest in showing us how to be. He has an interest in healing and fixing and correcting. This goes back to the question of why does he intervene some places and he doesn't. And I think we've talked about this too before, that I mean, if there is free will, like if all things aren't determined, if there are alternative outcomes that are possible, which I think is true, then it doesn't take away the problem of evil, but it does change it. In other words, the way I presented it before was like, I have X amount of dollars in my bank account right now, and I know that there are children starving and dying in a ghetto in Delhi. And there's some way that I rationalize those two facts. I have children, I have responsibilities, I have these things. So even though I have resource that I'm not using right at this moment, and there are needs right at this moment that are valuable, those two things can coexist. And I think if they can coexist in me, like if those two things can be reconciled, then they can be reconciled in a billion times bigger in God.
Yeah, I'm not sure they can be reconciled, though. That's a problem. Because, I mean, I have too much. I have too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, why? I don't know why. I can't really. It comes down to I guess I just want it.
Right.
It comes down to my degree. I want it more than I want starving people to be fed. And it's a shitty thing to say. But, I mean, what's the other reason? I mean, why else? Do I need an iPad? Do I need an iPad? I don't need an iPad.
Right.
And I have one. So, that's another thing that, another topic for discussion that we've kind of touched on before, but we could certainly get more into. But I just imagine God kind of giving me a tour of Eden. Right, it's like, oh look, there's a waterfall that comes down. That's so cool. The salmon are jumping up the stream, and there's little dolphins. And look, they do the little jumps and they circle around. It's so great and so cool. And the snakes, they kind of grip the ground with their belly. And here's a tree. If you eat this tree,
no, they were walking.
Rape, murder, torture, everything's. Wait, what? Why is that there?
Do you have knives in your kitchen?
I do.
Presumably for good reasons. I mean, you're not carving up humans.
No.
They have a utility.
Yes.
But they could be used for that.
Right.
The question is, I think what you're trying to get at is what's the utility of that tree before the fall? And I don't know. But because I don't know.
It's just a temptation to me. That's all it is. It's like, here's this paradise, and here's the temptation. Enjoy yourself around here, but don't touch that. And that just seems arbitrary and cruel, and just like, okay, what's the point of that?
It doesn't seem any more arbitrary to me than the fact that there's a million of those trees around me every day.
Right, but presumably paradise was a pretty cool place.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool place too.
Before there was the tree.
But I don't know.
It wasn't interesting enough.
I don't know.
We need evil for it to be interesting. It wasn't interesting, and now it is. And to me, I get, I accept that. I get that. I accept that. But
you
God
accept it in the narrative.
Yeah,
you don't accept it in morality.
Right. God put it there, and that doesn't seem cool to me. But
I think that the answer to that question for me is that this world and the world to come are better in spite of the wrong things that we've all done. And those conditions, the alternative to me of being a piece of furniture sounds infinitely worse than a world where rape and murder can exist.
Right.
And it seems to be, from all that I can tell, that the capacity to make a choice that's consequential is a necessary component for that world to exist.
I mean, we can look at the beauty of everything, right? I mean, I don't know if you like Quentin Tarantino, maybe you don't, but there's violence. There's movies where people get shot in the face that are great movies. The Godfather's a great movie, in my opinion. Right. And, it depicts horrible things. It's like awful, beauty comes out of awful stuff. I mean, a lot of art, most art, maybe all art, is a juxtaposition between ugliness and beauty. Otherwise, it would just be fluff, right? Uh-huh. So, there needs to be some teeth. There needs to be something ugly. And you could say that's life. That's what we want. We want there to be ugliness as well. But you can't. But to me, you can't be a rape victim and say, "Why me?" and believe it. You can't believe in a God that would not that could change things and be a rape victim, and just say, "Well, God just didn't intervene in my behalf for some reason that is beyond me."
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that aren't beyond me. I just don't know all of them. Like for instance, if God makes it so that nothing bad ever happens, then there aren't really any consequences. Like if every time you step in front of a bus, God whisks you away, then you've basically just made a world with no choice again.
Right. We made paradise. Because nobody dies and nobody gets hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's paradise, and I feel like that's the goal, is just sort of like, we're trying to get back there. But maybe that's not the goal. Maybe we don't want to live in a world without ugliness. I don't know. I mean, because then there wouldn't be art. Then there wouldn't be, and there would, like, heaven is a place where nothing happens. But, nothing. Then we would get to a static, without evil, we're just at a static, nothing happens, no movement. Right?
Right.
Pretty much.
Right.
So, anyway, we need to wrap it up.
I don't know what ground we made, but we covered a lot of ground.
Well, I mean, I don't think, obviously the whole point of this
it's just
show
explore.
is just, how can we pick each other's brains and learn stuff. I mean, I want to know. You're an intelligent, rational, awesome guy, and I want to know how you can think what I think is insane, how you can have, live in that world, and I'm fascinated. I think this is awesome, and so we've gained a lot. We've had an awesome conversation about that I'll think about for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I'll go, oh man, I wish I had said that.
Do we have any idea what we're going to cover in the upcoming?
Yeah, I have just an entire list of ideas.
But why don't we have?
Well, we can also take ideas.
Yeah. Do we have a way for people to get a hold of us so that they can suggest ideas?
Comment on YouTube.
Comment on YouTube, and we'll follow those. And then I think we also have a Facebook page, don't we? We do.
That would be on you.
Okay. Well, we can respond to
Facebook
Facebook messages too.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we have that set up. So.
All right, brother.
It's good to be back together again.
I know. I miss you so much.
Love
I
you.
love you.